Good morning, everyone. Go ahead. So thank you for coming this morning. We have Renee Nunziata here, who is the Director of Financial Aid for Suffolk Community. So she's going to kind of walk through the process now. And things, we will share this information afterwards. We'll put it out. A lot of it's already out there on our website, but we'll share it again so you have it. Okay?
It's easier to hear it.
Right. It's easier. Right. That's exactly. So, Renee, thank you.
So I have to use this microphone so that the folks on the live stream can hear me. I know it's kind of strange because we're talking to 3 people here in the live audience, but no, you're not on it, but I am. So good morning. Actually, take this off. Okay, awesome. I have a hard time standing still, so I'm gonna be able to move a little bit. So good morning. So my guess is you're the parents of seniors. Okay, fantastic. Is this your first student going to college? Yeah, so you're probably feeling a little bit like this, a little scared, a little nervous, confused, overwhelmed, right? So I'm hoping that by the end of our session today, you're going to be feeling a little better about things. So what we're going to talk about this morning, we're going to go over the aid application process, how financial need is determined. We're going to talk about the different types of aid programs that are available to students, and then we're going to have a Q&A. Okay? So when we talk about financial aid, it primarily falls into 2 buckets. It's going to be the free money that's going to come in the form of scholarships and grants. And the primary difference between those 2 things is that scholarships tend to be based on some sort of merit, whether it be academic merit, some kind of musical talent, athletic ability, whereas grants typically end up having some kind of need component. So they're taking a look at the student's family situation and the financial picture and ability to pay, and that's how grants end up being given out. The other bucket would be self-help, and those are going to be the things that there's certain sort of action taken associated with these programs. So it's student loans, it's parent loans, so those are funds that are going to be repaid in the future. And then the federal work-study program would also be considered something self-help, because that is the student would have a job and they are being paid for the hours that they work. So as far as where this financial aid comes from, it comes from a variety of sources. There are funds available through the federal government for New York State residents attending a New York State college or university. They are eligible for New York State aid programs. Colleges and universities themselves give out a variety of funds under grants and scholarships. And then lastly, there are opportunities to pursue funds through the community, external sources, not the college, not these state or government agencies, but it could be things like sometimes your employer might have funds available in the form of a scholarship, or you might be part of a union that extends benefits down through to dependent students. So that's something to investigate as well. So how is eligibility determined? Essentially, aid is going to be based on financial need, a combination of merit or both, but really whoever is giving out the money determines how those funds are going to be distributed to students. So filing the FAFSA is how federal aid eligibility is determined. A common question I get is, what is the income cutoff? When we talk about federal aid programs, it's not a straightforward, if you make under X amount of dollars, you're going to automatically qualify for Y amount of funds, okay? There's a number of factors that are taken into consideration, and we're going to talk about that. With the New York State aid programs, it is a little more straightforward. They do use cutoffs. So if the income is below a certain threshold, a student could qualify for that program, and then the amount and the type of awards are going to be based on the student's enrollment status. Some programs are specifically for full-time students taking 12 or more credits a semester, and other programs are available to students on a part-time basis should they want to lighten their load and go part-time. When it comes to institutional aid, again, could be combinations of merit and need. It could be just need-based or merit aid, and we are going to talk more about that as we go. So there is a bit of a philosophy behind need-based aid, and kind of keeping this at the forefront of your mind helps you to understand as you do these, and if you get results of your applications and you say, I don't understand, really, paying for college is first the responsibility of the student and the family, and the aid resources are there to supplement that ability to pay, okay? It's not designed to be that every student in the country is going to have enough funds through free money that they're going to be able to pay for everything to go to school. This is sort of where the approach is to these need-based funds. Okay, so as far as how to apply, deadline dates for admission applications and for financial aid are different, and you want to be mindful of that. More and more students do things like early action, early decision, and those deadlines are rapidly approaching if they haven't already passed. I'm not so much on the admission side of the house. I deal with the money, so I don't pay too much attention to those, and I work at an institution that isn't open access, and we have open enrollment. So when we talk about deadlines for financial aid, this is where it can get a little confusing, because technically the deadline for the FAFSA is at the end of the spring semester of their freshman year. And you're scratching your head and you're saying, but that doesn't make any sense because I have to pay the bill in the beginning of the fall semester and then again at the beginning of the spring. If I wait, how am I going to have money? Well, if you wait, you won't. You really need to get those applications in early. Every school is going to establish a priority deadline for their financial aid application. So what you'll want to do is, for all of the schools that are under consideration, take a look at their financial aid web pages, because on those web pages it will list what the priority filing deadline is. And that's just so that students filing before that deadline, they're going to be considered for the maximum aid programs available. There's a couple of federal aid programs where the way they work is that the government gives the institution money and then the school has to distribute those funds. And usually they have way more students who qualify for these funds than funds available. So they establish priority deadlines to help distribute things fairly. So the schools themselves are also going to ask for different types of financial aid applications. The FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid, and it's the application for federal funds. Just about every school is going to use the FAFSA, okay? So that is something you're definitely going to want to complete. The other type of application is the CSS profile, and that stands for the College Scholarship Service Profile. That's through the College Board, and not every school is going to use that, so you want to make sure that you actually need to do that application before you go ahead and do it, because unlike the FAFSA and the state aid programs, the CSS profile has a cost associated with it. So before you spend money on something you don't need, just again, take a look at the financial aid webpage for the schools under consideration to see if the CSS profile is even needed. That's primarily going to be used to give out institutional aid, and most of the time it's a private school that's looking for that, but not every private school looks for that. You're going to be completing separate state aid applications for New York State aid programs, and you also want to be on the lookout for any additional institutional forms. And again, they will list this on the financial aid web pages of the individual schools if there are any kind of supplemental forms that need to be completed in order to be considered for the maximum aid programs available. So when it comes to the FAFSA is filed every year, okay? It's the student's application. Most of the time it's going to contain parent information on it, but you do need to complete that FAFSA each year, and it opens up on October 1st. It uses tax information from 2 years prior to complete that. So you will have, at that point, you should already have your tax information done from 2 years ago. For the incoming for the seniors that are going to be incoming freshmen in the fall, the application to complete is the 23-24 FAFSA. Make note of this because when you go in to do the application, the 22-23 FAFSA is also available to complete because that's for our current college students who are attending this fall 22 and in the spring of 23. Okay, so a good way to remember which FAFSA you're doing is what is the period of enrollment? What is the fall semester, and then what is the spring semester, and that is the FAFSA. And then it always uses that tax information from 2 years prior to the fall. Okay. Now, being that circumstances can change, right? Sometimes what's on your tax return from 2 years ago may not accurately reflect your current financial situation. You could have changed jobs, people retire, people end up in periods of unemployment. There could be, you have things reflected on your tax return that was like a one-time distribution of some kind of fund that was taxable that you're no longer receiving. So if you have something that's different about your current financial situation, and it would be a reduction in income, not an increase in income, because these financial aid applications, they are income-based. So if you're making more money now, that's not something you're going to run off to tell the school to say, oh, I make more than what it says, shouldn't I get less? No, you take advantage of the fact that your income is what it is on the 21 tax return, and then eventually maybe things decrease in the future. But if there is a change where your current situation is lower than 2021, you're going to want to make the colleges and universities that the student is considering aware of that. Now, they may be able to do something right away to reevaluate aid eligibility, or they may say you have to wait until you make an admission decision and pay your tuition deposit, because you have to remember, students are applying to so many colleges now. You know, years ago, students would maybe apply to like 5 colleges. Now it's not strange. I hear students applying to like 15 colleges at a time. So what happens is colleges, they may receive 20,000 applications for 3,000 spots. They may admit 12,000 students to get their 3,000 yields for the incoming class. So we in the financial aid office, we're usually not a very large office. I have a staff of, besides for myself, 5 full-time employees. I worked at a college, or I worked at a local university. We had a staff of about 20 people for 25,000 students. So they're not necessarily going to do these reevaluations or special circumstances right now. So again, just talk to them though, because they can guide you through the process, because you want to make sure that you are being, your aid eligibility is based on current circumstances and not 2 years ago. Okay, we're going to talk about the IRS data retrieval tool in a little bit, but basically you have the ability to link over to the IRS to pull in the information. If you are presented with the opportunity to do this, I would recommend that you do, because it reduces errors on the FAFSA. It can get confusing sometimes about what number are you supposed to report on which line. And I will mention that on the FAFSA, there is for every single question, there's a question mark in a circle, and that's a button. So if you get lost or you're not sure where you're supposed to answer something, put your cursor in the field where you're supposed to answer the question and click the help button, and it will open up a pretty good description and notes of exactly what's being asked for. So take a look at that. Now you can list, or the student can list up to 10 schools on FAFSA. The way they list these is you can either take a look at the financial aid web pages to get the federal school code and just make a note of that, or as you're doing the FAFSA application, there's a search box. So you can either type in the name of the school, you can type in the state where the school is, and it will present a list, and then you just kind of click on it to add the school code. Now, if your student is applying to more than 10 schools, you will want to list the first 10 schools on the application. Once the FAFSA is processed, you can then go back in to make a correction, remove some of the schools to be able to add in the number of schools that you need to then add in, okay? So that's about the schools. Yeah, okay, so let's go on and talk about who is the applicant. Now I have 22 years in financial aid experience, so I've been doing this a long time, and I know full well that it is usually the parent sitting down at the computer to complete the application for the student. The students want nothing to do with this. But you know, I really encourage you to involve them as much as you can. Because it's a good idea that they have some idea of what's going on here. But regardless of who's sitting in front of the computer completing these, the student is the applicant, okay? So you have to keep that in mind. So if you're gonna sit down in front of the computer and do this for your child, you have to kind of think of, okay, I am my son or I am my daughter, and I am sitting here as that person doing this application. So the reason I mention that is, I think things have changed a little bit on the FAFSA, and it's gotten a little bit better, but what it used to do is it used to say you and your. And for a parent sitting there, they were like, oh, they're talking to me, right? No, but they were really talking to the student. So what would happen is parents would sit down and they're reporting their information in the student section of the FAFSA. Then when it would switch over to say parent, then they're reporting their information again. So income gets double counted and it throws everything off. So you don't want to do that. Just so you're aware, most students need to provide parent information on the application. Okay, and this is because, again, this is the government's way of trying to assess ability to pay. If every student in the country was able to not include parent information and base it on their part-time job, if they even had one, every student would qualify, and there's just not enough funds to go around, okay? So this is why parent information goes on the application. And the student is going to be presented with questions on both the federal and state aid application to determine that dependency status. On the federal side of things, This is the criteria that makes a student independent, okay? They need to be a veteran or on active duty. They need to be married themselves, have their own children or dependents that they provide more than 50% support. If the student is an orphan, ward of the court, in foster care, or in legal guardianship, they're considered independent and they do not report parent information. If they are 24 or turning 24 in the academic year, that makes them independent just based on their age. Or if a student is designated by a government or high school agency as homeless or at risk of being homeless, they would be considered independent. But no other circumstance is going to make the student automatically independent. So if you or your student is in a situation where they're not living with a parent or they have extenuating circumstances, they should contact the school, because the school will guide them through a process called the dependency override. On the state side of things, there's a lot of overlap in terms of the criteria. Student would need to be married. The age of the student actually goes up from 24 to 35. So it's not until a student is 35 if they're still living at home with their parent, which I'm sure you're all saying to yourself, oh my gosh, I hope they're not living with me when they're 35 years old. But you never know. If the student is 22 or older, they don't live at home, they're not claimed as dependents on tax returns, and they don't receive any kind of financial assistance from the parent, or rather in excess of $750, they can be considered independent for state aid. But just so you know, independent status for state aid purposes does not automatically mean more money. In fact, students in this scenario right here, they actually get less money, about half the award amount, than a dependent student coming from a family that demonstrates high financial needs. So don't think automatically that if I make my student independent, we're going to get more money, because that's not always the case. As far as who is the parent on the application, it is the biological or adoptive parent only. No other relative acting as a parent would be reported on the FAFSA application. So if the student's parents are divorced, then it's the custodial parent, that's whose information goes on the FAFSA. So it's if the parents are divorced or separated. And separated means not necessarily legal separation, but physically living in a separate residence. As far as who the custodial parent is, it's who the student lives with, not who is claiming the student on the tax return, because sometimes that flip-flops each year. If the custodial parent is remarried, then step-parent information does get reported on the FAFSA, whether or not that step-parent is providing any kind of financial contribution to the student's cost of education. If biological parents are unmarried but live in the same household, both incomes get reported on the FAFSA. This was something that changed years ago, but I can tell you, I've lost track of how many years ago it was, but one of the things parents used to do is they'd get divorced, but still live in the same house. That's how they would try to beat the system. But now if both biological parents live in that same house, they are going to get their income information is going to be reported, but no one else is the parent, okay? So if you have an extenuating circumstance and you want to talk to me afterwards, I will be around. My contact information will be up on the screen where you can email me as well, but I just want to be clear about this, because this sometimes throws people for a loop and you're really not sure how to navigate who should be on the applications. Okay, so it was mentioned that some of the resources are going to be pushed out to you. One of the things that is included in the shared folder that you're going to have a link to is detailed guidance on creating the FSA ID and password, okay? The FSA ID and password is sort of the first step in the process, and it is going to be, it serves as the electronic signature both on the FAFSA, and it's really the username and password for every federal site related to any kind of financial aid. Now, both the student and the parent need an FSA ID and password. So if you are not a first-time parent with a student going to college, and you have an older sibling that's already in school and you have an FSA ID already, as the parent, that you're still going to use that same FSA ID. But if you're brand new to this process, the student needs an FSA ID, and so does the parent. And this is, so if they're not going to sit with you while you're doing the FAFSA application, your student should definitely be sitting down with you while you are creating these FSA IDs and passwords. And here's why. More often than not, the parent will sit down and they say, okay, I know my student's name, date of birth, social security number, I can start this process. Then I'm going to put my email address in there, because my student never checks email. They look at Snapchat, they look at TikTok, but they don't look at email, right? So I'm going to put my parent email in here as I set this thing up. But what happens is that when they go to create their own FSA ID, it will give them a message that the email is already in use. So each FSA ID has a unique email address attached to it and a unique mobile number. So that's why let your students set theirs up. The other reason is there's a section of it while you're setting it up that will ask a series of security questions. You may not know your son or daughter's favorite food today, or what their favorite color is today, or who their best friend is today. So I would recommend let them answer those questions, because those are the questions that will be asked and answered down the road, or possibly next year if you go to do this again and you didn't write it down and you forgot what the username and password is, all right? So rather than getting locked out of it and then having to call federal student aid, just let the student do this part of it and have a notebook and write this down, or put it in a note in a phone somewhere, something that you're going to be able to access from year to year, because you will reuse it every time the FAFSA is filed. So as far as how you create this FSA ID, there's a couple of opportunities. You can go right to studentaid.gov. Kind of at the top is a banner. You'll see the logo, and if you follow the link across, there's an option to create an account there, or you can do it as part of the actual FAFSA process. So let's take a look at how you access the FAFSA itself. Again, you're going to be on studentaid.gov. Up at the top, you'll see that link for apply for aid, and it's like a drop down, and you'll see an option to complete the FAFSA. As a brand new applicant for the year, you're going to say new to the FAFSA process, and you're going to click on start here. You're then presented with an opportunity as to how you're going to get into it. So if it's the student sitting there at the computer with you, again, this is like a bonding experience, right? How much fun. You can sit down for like 30 to 40 minutes and you can file your financial aid application together. Just think of how wonderful that could be. No, but if you are going to go in as the student, okay, so it's either you go in as the student who's accessing the form, or you're the parent filling out the form. Most of the time, this one you can ignore at the bottom unless you are a preparer filling out the FAFSA for someone else. So if you click on the top option and you say, I am the student, this is where it's going to ask for the student to log in with their FSA ID and password, or they can create the FSA ID right then and there. Or lastly, the option would be to use personal identifiers to get into the application. Now, when you click on that second option on the previous slide and you say, I am the parent accessing the FAFSA for my student, it looks like this. They have to enter the student's personal identifier. So again, it's name, social, date of birth, and anytime you start the FAFSA, it's going to ask you to create a save key. The save key is just a short little password that you create, or your student creates, to save the application, because it saves as you go. If for some reason you start this and you get super frustrated and you need to walk away, or you're unsure about something, or you don't have the access to the information right then and there, and you have to save the application and come back to it, you will have to enter the save key, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, very easy one to remember, right? Like, it just has to be something easy that you can get into the application again. So jot that down as you do this as well. Okay, so I sort of laid out this presentation in a way of what you're going to experience as you're actually doing the process. So once you get into the FAFSA, it's going to ask a series of questions about the student. It's going to ask about those school codes, where do you want the information sent to. Then it's going to ask about the parent. It's going to ask about the parent's marital status, social, date of birth, all of that. Then it's going to ask some income questions about the parent. And whenever it is indicated on the FAFSA that a tax return was filed and that the marital status jives up with the tax filing status, so again, if it's you are married as a parent and you filed your 2021 taxes as married filing joint and you filed a return, it's going to present the option to link over to the IRS data retrieval tool. In some cases, it won't let you do that. So if you were widowed or became divorced or separated after those taxes were filed, it's going to say, oh, there's a mismatch, and you're going to have to manually enter the information. Once you get through the income questions for the parent side of things, it's then going to bounce back over to the student. Now, depending on how the parent income questions are answered, in situations where the parent income is on the lower side, it may not even go back and ask the student for information about their income. In other cases, it will. Okay, so just be mindful of that. There's a lot of skip logic involved in the FAFSA. They put a lot of effort into trying to shorten things. Back in the days when this was a paper thing and everybody filled it out via like clicking little, writing things in and filling in little bubbles. I think there's over 200 questions on the application. So they've really kind of weeded it through, and they only are asking things that actually pertain to the family situation. Once you get through that, there is going to be a spot to sign the FAFSA. Now, if you've already accessed the IRS data retrieval tool and you entered that FSA ID and password, there'll be a button to simply sign it. If you did not access the data retrieval tool or you didn't at any point access the FAFSA with an FSA ID, it's going to say, okay, sign the FAFSA, and it then prompts to log in. And it's also at that point you can create an FSA ID. So there's lots of opportunities to do it. You can't really mess that up. Once the FAFSA is signed and it is submitted, you will get that congratulations, the FAFSA has been submitted, you get a confirmation number, and you're like, gosh, it's over, thank goodness, because that was so painful. It's really not that bad, but you know, the first time you're doing it, it hurts a little bit when you're doing it, because it just gets a little tedious, and you get nervous, and you don't want to mess up, so it's a little stressful. So then you can breathe that sigh of relief once you get that confirmation page. And you'll make note of a couple of things on there. It's going to tell you what the expected family contribution is. We're going to talk about what that means. It's going to give a brief overview of the types of federal aid programs that the student may qualify for, and they're just basing that on the expected family contribution result. Again, we're going to go over how that aid eligibility is determined. And then lastly, what you want to make note of is there is going to be a link. As long as a New York State school has been listed on the FAFSA, there would be a presentation of the link to get over to the New York State aid application, okay? So you'll want to do that. Even if the student thinks that they are considering all schools outside of New York, it is recommended that you throw at least one school, it doesn't matter what school it is on there, on the FAFSA, just so that the state aid application can be done. Because you never know, right? Like something can change, student has intentions to go to Florida, and then they say, you know what, at the last minute, nope, I'm gonna stay home instead. At least some of this stuff will already be set up in place, should they make a last minute decision. So on that confirmation page of the FAFSA, when you link over to the state aid application, what you're doing is the New York State payment application, and it's the starting point for most state aid programs. It is actually the TAP application, the tuition assistance program, and that's a grant program through New York State. And it is the first step if the student is then going to apply for additional scholarship programs through the state, okay? First-time users do need to create a username and PIN number on the HESC side. HESC is the Higher Education Services Corporation, and they are administering all New York State aid programs for New York State. Now, again, that's the student, it's their information that's being used to create the username and PIN number. Now, what'll happen is if you miss the link on the confirmation page of the FAFSA, you got so excited that you closed that browser, you threw that top down to the laptop, and you were like, oh, thank God it's over. All you have to do is wait until the student receives the link in their email to say the TAP application is available to complete. Because what happens is, while it looks like you're being taken out to an external site, you're actually still within the FAFSA. It's just they changed the graphics and makes it look like you're in New York State side. Once you close the browser, you can't access it again because the FAFSA has to actually process. So your information, not only is your FAFSA information sent to all of the schools listed on the application, it's sent to New York State, so it generates the New York State payment application. So that's why you would have to wait. Now, if you, if the student, after about 2 to 3 weeks, doesn't receive an email, you can actually navigate directly to the TAP application. But again, going to HESC, you'll see the option for pay, then there'll be a link for apply for financial aid, and then a link to apply for TAP. If you try to navigate to that link right away after doing the FAFSA, it's going to say there's no application available yet. Right? But as far as what the TAP program looks like, where I mentioned income cutoffs, $80,000 net taxable income or less, the student will qualify for the New York State Tuition Assistance Program. Students attending a SUNY or CUNY school, they can be attending on a part-time basis and be eligible for the TAP program. Otherwise, the student needs to be full-time, which is 12 or more credits. So the award ranges from $500 to $5,665 currently, and it is on a sliding scale. The closer the income is to this, the lower the TAP amount is going to be. Unlike the FAFSA, only one school at a time can be listed on the payment application. So it will automatically pull in the first New York State school listed. You are welcome to change that to a different New York State school. Ultimately, though, wherever the student decides to attend, you want to make sure that that school code is who is listed on that payment application so that the information gets sent to the school accordingly. For parents or for dependent students that are listing parent information on the TAP application, there is a section where the TAP application needs to be signed. Basically what's going to happen is it's going to ask for the New York State issued ID number of the parent, so this is driver's license, learner's permit, or state issued ID, where you're going to enter that number and then type in the parent's name. Okay, so what are the next steps? So the FAFSA is done. You may or may not have completed the CSS profile as well, and I don't really cover that because it doesn't apply to everyone, and not all private schools are using it. I think there's been a little bit of an uptick in using the CSS profile, but it's not as many schools, right? So I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. So you do the FAFSA, you do the New York State aid application. What happens next? Well, what's going to happen is the student is going to be notified about potential award eligibility after they have been admitted to the school. Okay, because we can't offer financial aid unless the student is accepted. All right, so you will get the accepted notice before you start to hear about financial aid. All right, so just you can kind of gauge based on that. Now, in some cases, the school may need additional information to process the financial aid application. So sometimes there's several checks that happen with a variety of databases. So when a student indicates they're a U.S. citizen on the FAFSA, a check is done with the Social Security Administration to verify that citizenship status. If a student is a permanent resident, there is a check that's done with the Department of Homeland Security with the alien registration number to confirm that citizenship status. If a student ever indicates they're a veteran, a check goes off with the Department of Veteran Affairs. So there's a variety of databases that this will check up against to verify information. Now, sometimes things go awry and the school has to confirm things. So they may tell you additional documentation is needed. There's another thing where the process has been waived for the last 2 years because of the COVID pandemic. It's called verification. And what that is, it's like an audit of the FAFSA information, where we at the financial aid office have to check and make sure that what you put on the FAFSA is correct, and we do that by collecting your tax documents. All right, so your record could get flagged for verification. So you want to pay attention to possible delays, and the way you do this is, as the students are applying to the schools, a lot of the times they are going to have the opportunity to create a student account at that institution through the admission process. So if they're creating student accounts, sometimes it's going to show up there, the little checklists and things in the individual school systems. They might send an email. In some cases, they might send a letter home in regular mail. But again, this is where your student needs to, now as they're going through this process, this is where they need to begin checking their email, because that's how a lot of the schools are going to start notifying students. And the reason we do that, there's cost savings. We're not paying for postage, and it's fast. We can send it right out to the student, and they get that information right away. So we've kind of, as institutions, we've sort of moved in that direction to utilizing these electronic methods because it's quick and easy. Where it's quick and it's easier for the students to access the information. Okay. So I mentioned verification. After you do the FAFSA, you're going to want to make sure you just have a copy of your 21 tax information on hand should the school ask for that. If you don't have a copy of the 21 taxes, you can request your tax transcript directly from the IRS. If you didn't file taxes because you were not required to do so, you would need to obtain a letter from the non-filing letter from the IRS. And again, the school may not ask for this, but it's a good idea to have it ready and on hand, so that should the school ask for it, you can submit it right away, all right? Because it does take a couple of weeks if you have to request things from the IRS. Okay, you want to be reviewing the school's web pages for information about scholarships, because once students are admitted, a lot of the times when they're getting their acceptance notice or shortly thereafter, scholarship notifications begin to go out. It might be included in the same acceptance notice. Could be something separate. School students are going to be considered for a variety of scholarships just based on their admission application. They don't have to do anything separate for that. Okay, it's taking a look at. It could be looking at high school GPA. It could be looking at standardized test scores if they took them and submitted them. It could be looking at extracurricular activities that they were engaged in. It could be looking at a variety of things on that admission application that could put a student in the running for a scholarship. There are cases where there are other scholarship dollars available to incoming freshmen, but the school is asking for an additional supplemental application. So this is where your students should be paying attention to this, because there could be scholarships based on leadership. There could be scholarships based on community service. There could be scholarships based on a lot of different things earmarked specifically for incoming freshmen. So you want to take a look at the individual schools' websites. They might have scholarship information as part of their financial aid webpage, or it could be completely separate. So the easiest way to get to it would be from the homepage. Usually every page has a search box at the top. Go ahead and throw in scholarships and just take a look and see what's out there. I used to serve on a scholarship selection committee at my prior institution, and it was probably one of the most common questions I was asked. How do I get money for school? How do I get scholarships? How do I apply for scholarships? I mean, it was like over and over and over again. And then we would sit down to look at the number of applications for some of the scholarships, and we have like 30. That's not very many. So, right, so like the odds are pretty good that the student could be selected for a scholarship when you're only up against 29 other students, right? So I mention this and I try to stress it because it's one of those things that, you know, they ask the question, but there's no follow-through on it. So try to encourage your student to apply for these funds, because you have to remember, when it comes to financial aid and it comes to these scholarships, it's not like one fund is going to cover everything. It's a little bit of money from a lot of different places that gets combined together to help towards the cost of education. Students should be exploring community, regional, and national scholarship opportunities. There's a lot of websites out there, things like fastweb.com, scholarship.com. There's hundreds of them out there. They're not bad, okay, but you do want to exercise caution because there are scam sites out there, all right? So websites that are asking for personal sensitive information, you want to stay away from that. They shouldn't be asking for social security numbers. They shouldn't be asking for payment. You shouldn't be paying money to apply for scholarships. I've heard crazy stories in the past of students where they were being asked to upload copies of their driver's license and passports. Why would you need that for a scholarship, right? So like anything that's asking for something strange like that, you should just close the browser, move on, and review a different opportunity, because that's likely just an attempt to get personal information to steal identity. Again, I had mentioned earlier, you know, talk to your employer, see if there's any scholarship funds available maybe for your student who's attending, or if you're part of a union, investigate that, because there's a lot of stuff out there. It's just a kind of a matter of how do you find it. Talk to the guidance department. I'm sure they have resources on opportunities, possibly locally, but you just have to ask, okay? You just ask and you apply, because if you apply and you don't get it, that's okay. But if you didn't apply, you know, you're definitely not going to get it, right? So common sense there. Okay, so again, I'm kind of following the timeline of like what's happening and when it's happening. Now, New York State has a variety of other programs available, and one of them is the Excelsior Scholarship. This is New York's free tuition program. And the reason this sort of falls in here in the presentation is because that application doesn't open up until the spring. All right, it usually opens up, it's been in place for a couple of years, but in my experience, it sort of opened up anywhere between April. Sometimes there was one year it opened up in June. So you want to keep an eye out on the Higher Education Services website as to when that application opens up. They make it very prominent on the homepage as soon as it does, but you can go ahead and enter an email address to be notified about when the scholarship does open. Or you can just mark a calendar and start looking at it, like I would say beginning of April, mid-April, just to get a gauge and just go in periodically to check the availability of this application. Now, it does have a strict application deadline though, so once that thing opens up, if you are considering the scholarship program, you definitely want to get that application done, because once it closes, there is no flexibility on that deadline date. So this particular program is available to students attending full-time at a CUNY or a SUNY institution. It covers up to the full cost of tuition, or $5,500 less other scholarships or grants received. Okay, so if a student qualifies for, say, the TAP program and they qualify for a federal grant, or they've been given a scholarship by the school, it may erode the amount of dollars a student could get under the Excelsior program, but that's for us to figure out in the financial aid office. It's still worth it to go ahead and apply, even if you want to end up declining it down the road. So as far as eligibility goes, for TAP, we talked about $80,000 net taxable income on the New York State return. For the Excelsior program, it looks at $125,000 adjusted gross income off of the federal return. Okay, so a little bit different criteria there. Sounds like a great program, free tuition, right? It's not really a catch. There's just some considerations that you want to keep in mind. I mentioned the strict application deadline, but unlike TAP that is based primarily on need, The Excelsior Scholarship is sort of a hybrid program. It's more like a scholarship than just a grant because it is designed with rather strict academic requirements to maintain eligibility. A student has to earn 30 credits per academic year because this is really designed for on-time completion. So a student pursuing an associate's degree would get it done in 2 years, and a student pursuing a bachelor's degree would get that done in 4 years. So it's 30, 60, 90, 120 to get that thing done on time. Now, anytime a student changes their program, they might go from an English major to, I don't know what's completely opposite of that, engineering, right? So courses taken under other programs that may not be applicable to the new major could throw a student off track, or they might have to be enrolled for an extra semester or an extra year. That could throw them out of eligibility for the Excelsior program. If the student ever decides to take a semester off, unless there was extenuating circumstances, that would remove them from the program itself. But really talk to the financial aid office, right? If there's ever going to be a changing major, or like if the student's a recipient of this, changing majors, changing classes, really we help you in the financial aid office to determine and help students stay on track. So you'd want to encourage your student to do the same. There is a 5-page contract it's signed. And what this is there's a residency requirement attached to this as well. So for as long as the student receives the Excelsior program, they would have to then live in New York State for the same amount of time. So if they got it for 4 years in a bachelor's program, they could go off to graduate school in another state, that's fine. But once they finish school, they have to come back to New York. Otherwise, it converts to an interest-free loan. So there was, when this program first opened, a lot of people said, oh my gosh, we're not going to take this. They qualified, but they said, we're not going to do this because if we don't stay in New York, we're moving to Florida, whatever the case may be, we don't want this to be a loan for the student. What this really is a deferred tuition payment plan, okay? So in other words, what that means is if you qualify for Excelsior but you don't take it, you are somehow paying that bill out of pocket, whether it's out of pocket on a payment plan or through a loan that has interest. If you can take the Excelsior scholarship, you're not laying anything out to pay the tuition because it's being covered by the program. And should that not be met, that residency requirement, well, then you're paying it later, right? So it's not, people get very scared, oh, it's a loan, but it's an interest-free loan. So they're just breaking it up over 10 years and you're just paying it then, which actually can work out to be a lot less than if you were having to lay out the tuition in one chunk at the beginning of each semester. If the student is not attending a SUNY CUNY and they're attending a private institution, there is a program called the Enhanced Tuition Award that some private schools are participating in because when the program was created, they didn't want to leave the private schools out. So private schools have the option to participate in the Enhanced Tuition Award, same eligibility criteria as Excelsior, same academic requirements, but take a look again on those financial aid web pages. They could still get some money through the private school through the ETA program. There's a number of other grants and scholarships available. There's a new nursing program available. There's, for many years, there's been the Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics Award. There are programs for veterans. There's a number of military-connected students. So there's a number of other opportunities that should be taken a look at on the HESC website under pay. And then on the last bullet point is an option to click on a link for a complete list. And then it kind of takes you over to a page that looks like this, where it'll have the heading Grant, Scholarship, and Loan, and there'll be a tab for New York scholarships and other awards. So take a look at that because there are separate applications for those other programs. Okay. Any student who does not meet the citizenship requirements for applying for federal financial aid, so basically to qualify for federal aid programs, a student needs to be either a U.S. citizen, a permanent resident, or another eligible non-citizen. Should a student not meet that criteria, they cannot file a FAFSA, or they should not file a FAFSA because they're not going to be eligible, but they can receive aid through the New York State Jose Peralta DREAM Act. It allows them access, so if this is something that pertains to you or something you know, students are encouraged to apply for this program. The information remains completely outside of New York State through a third-party agency, and then the information of approval is sent over to the state. But there is a whole guide right on the homepage. Is the link to the program, and then there's an application that should be reviewed should a student want to apply through that program. Okay, so that's the state aid programs. Now we're gonna go back and we're gonna talk about how this federal aid stuff gets determined. Because again, this is where things are a little more convoluted based on the answers of the questions of the FAFSA, and then we're gonna talk about the federal aid program. So again, we talked about at the end of the FAFSA that expected family contribution, and I hate the name of that. And I've always hated the name of it. And I finally got my wishes come true next year. They're changing the name and it's being called the Student Aid Index. But when you hear expected family contribution, what does it make you think? That's how much your family is going to be expected to contribute to college, right? Like it kind of is self-descriptive, but that's not really what it means, okay? It has a little bit of a different meaning when we talk about financial aid. Again, the FAFSA is trying to measure an ability to pay by asking all the questions that it asks. It's not really getting into your willingness to pay. Talked about that philosophy of need-based aid at the very beginning. So we take that result of the FAFSA, that expected family contribution, and we combine that with the cost of attendance. But let's understand what the cost of attendance is. It is the school sticker price, right? So it's not necessarily what the student's going to pay to go to school, but it is going to be a combination of the direct and the indirect expenses. Tuition and fees are always direct expenses because the school is going to bill the student for that. Housing and food will be a direct expense if the student is living in the dorm and has a meal plan. If the student is living off campus, they still have to live somewhere and there's an expense associated with that. That just becomes an indirect expense, okay? Other indirect expenses include books and supplies, transportation, and other miscellaneous personal expenses. So the cost of attendance is the cap of how much student can receive in financial aid in a given academic year. So what we do is we take that cost of attendance and we subtract the expected family contribution. So the EFC that comes from the FAFSA remains the same no matter what school the student is attending. Where it starts to change aid eligibility is based on the cost of attendance of the school. More expensive schools are going to generate more financial need when you combine with the expected family contribution. So to illustrate this, you have one school where the total cost for the year is roughly $14,500. The EFC is 15,000. When you do the math problem, this is like a negative number. So there's no financial need demonstrated at that institution. But at another school whose cost of attendance is roughly 32,000, well, in that case, that family has demonstrated $17,000 in financial need. So where this comes into play, there will be no need-based aid awarded at this school, but there will be need-based aid awarded at this school, or there will be eligibility for need-based aid. Okay, so that's where it starts to get a little different. So let's talk about how they come up with this EFC. This is not my attempt to make you a financial aid professional, because I promise you don't want to do that. No, it's fun, it really is. But I want to kind of demystify some of it for you, because I hear it all the time. That FAFSA came back with this crazy number saying that my expected family contribution is $32,000. I don't have $32,000 to pay for my kid to go to school this year. So I want to help you to understand how they kind of come up with some of this stuff, all right? So there's basically 4 components that go into it. Parents' income, parents' asset, student income, student asset. And you will see as you do the FAFSA, it does not ask anywhere, what is your mortgage? What is your rent? What is your car payment? What is your insurance payment? How much do you pay per week in food? Because they don't care, is the bottom line. And we're going to see how that comes into play. So the FAFSA is going to ask a whole bunch of questions about income, taxed income, and different forms of untaxed income, okay? So it takes that income, it combines it, and then it subtracts away from it certain adjustments. So you get a credit for the federal income tax that you pay. You get a credit for your Social Security contributions. You have an employment expense allowance because the government says if you have a job, it costs you money, right? You have to have clothes, you have to get to and from your job, and so on and so forth. So they give you a break there. There's a state and local tax allowance, and this right here is the only spot that it takes into account that we on Long Island live in one of the most expensive places in the country. Okay, so you get this little tax break there for the local taxes. And then what the government applies is an income protection allowance. And that income protection allowance is based on the family size in total and the number of students in college. But I illustrate this because according to the federal government, your basic needs, food, clothing, shelter for a family of 4 with 1 in college, you can survive on $30,190. Well, everybody laughs, but that is because it is very comical. But this is where you kind of get an idea of it's all that income minus these things, minus this laughable income protection allowance. That's a portion. And so then kind of what's left over is sort of what goes into that expected family contribution. There's some other calculations done against it, but this is where you start to see, oh, okay, this is why my EFC is a little on the higher side, because the income part of it is a bit higher. Next, there is going to be the assets. So what are assets when it comes to the FAFSA? So there's a question, and most people are presented with the question on the FAFSA. In some cases you won't be, but in most cases you will be, where it's going to ask you to report asset information. So as of the day you are filling out the FAFSA, how much cash do you have in your pocket, in your wallet, and stuffed in your mattress? How much is in your checking account? How much is in your savings account? Okay. Then it's going to consider different types of investments. Now, if you are a business owner and you have the equivalent of 100 full-time employees, the value of your business gets reported on the FAFSA. If you are a business owner and you have a couple of people that work for you, then do not consider the value of the business whatsoever. If you own real estate, aside from your primary residence, so not the home you live in and own, but do you own a vacation home? Do you own land somewhere? Okay. Any real estate owned outside of the primary residence, the net value of that goes on the FAFSA as well. Other investments include things like stocks, bonds, mutual funds, 529 college savings plans, and we're going to have a full slide dedicated to those next. But assets or investments do not include retirement. So not your IRA, not your 401k, or whatever the investments into the 401, how you have those invested, or your 403b, or any other retirement account earmarked, or any other account specifically earmarked for retirement. Now, you can't say, well, I have this savings account, but I'm calling that my retirement account. It actually has to be a retirement savings vehicle, okay? So what happens is when you report the asset information on the FAFSA, there is an asset protection allowance applied, and that asset protection allowance amount is based on the age of the older parent included in the household. So when you have a two-family household and the age of the older parent is, say, 50, you have $3,900 protected. And I kind of throw this up here because there has been an erosion, whereas in the past it kind of seemed like the government wanted you safe and that it wouldn't hurt when it came to financial aid. That we've seen a rapid erosion of that. As you can see how just a few years ago, that same parent used to have over $20,000 protected. Now they have under $4,000 protected. So, things have changed over time, and this is why if you had a student who went to school years ago and now you've got this other one coming in, you can see some drastic changes in how things are shown in the aid eligibility. 529 plans. So 529 college savings plans, they are considered an asset on the FAFSA, but how they get reported depends on a couple of things. Who owns the account? Okay, that's the first question. Who is the account owner? Not the beneficiary. Who owns it? All right, who gets the interest statement on it, right? If the account is owned by the student, it gets reported as an asset under the parent section of the FAFSA. It's a parent investment, not a student, because the students, their assets are taxed a bit higher. So for a 529 owned by the student, that should go under the parent section of the FAFSA. Any account owned by a parent for any other siblings in the household is an asset on that current FAFSA application. Okay, so in other words, I'm a parent and I have 3 kids. And my oldest is who we're doing the FAFSA for. So I have a 529, child A, child B, and child C. When as I do that FAFSA, the 529 that I have, the total value for all 3 kids is going to go on child A's FAFSA application under that parent investment. Okay. Now, if a non-custodial parent who's not reported on the FAFSA, or a grandparent, or aunt or uncle, or some generous rich friend set up a 529 for your child, then It doesn't count as an asset on the FAFSA. However, the distribution from the 529 plan is supposed to be reported. Takes about 2 years to show up on the FAFSA under the question, other money received on the student's behalf not reported elsewhere on the form. So you're saying, wait, what? So in other words, I'm a student and my grandmother set up a 529 for me. I'm a freshman in the fall of 23. Grandma takes $5,000 out of the 529 to help me pay towards my fall 2023 tuition. In the year that the FAFSA uses the 2023 tax information, which is going to be the 25-26 FAFSA, that's in my junior year in college, that $5,000 that I got from grandma in the fall of 23 is supposed to show up on that FAFSA application as other money paid on the student's behalf, not reported elsewhere on the form. So this is where they kind of catch that whole, well, it was set up by grandma and it doesn't show up and count towards what they have available to pay, but the distribution is supposed to be reported. Many people forget, and it doesn't show up, but technically that's where it's supposed to go, okay? Other types of custodial accounts, UGMA, UTMA accounts owned by the student, that gets reported as a student's asset. If the parent is a custodian on other these types of accounts for younger siblings, it does not go on the FAFSA, unlike the 529. So that's where things are a little bit different. I know that can be a little confusing, so we'll do Q&A at the end and you can ask questions and I can get into more examples. Okay, so after the parent income information, it's the student. A student can earn really up to $7,040 without anything being considered. So when your student goes off to college and they say, you know, you're kind of like, okay, you've asked me for laundry money like 30 times. You have a meal plan, why do you keep asking me for Starbucks money, like eat in the dorm or eat in the dining hall, right? And you're like, okay, it's time. You're like 19 now, 18, 19. But why don't you get a part-time job? Oh, but I can't. It'll affect my financial aid. No, it won't. I promise you it won't, because they're not going to make that much money on it as working part-time, okay? But they can earn up to $7,040. Anything above that threshold is assessed at 50%. And students have no asset protection allowance at all. So anything that they have in their assets, that is assessed at 20%. The reality in the EFC, the government's definition of discretionary income, it may not coincide with yours. Again, we talked about how expensive it is to live here in New York and on Long Island. Some folks are going to spend more on discretionary income than the government deems necessary. I always mention this, you can have zero contribution from your assets, but you can use your assets towards the expected family contribution. So an example of that is, you know, we talk about the different types of financing products out there. I've known folks to turn to an equity line of credit against the primary residence. So the primary residence didn't get counted, but they leveraged that to take, say, an equity line of credit because the rate's so low to use those funds towards the cost of education. So let's talk about these federal aid programs that you're going to see in these award letters potentially. So there is the federal Pell Grant. So when that expected family contribution falls below 0 to 6206, then the student is going to be eligible for the Pell Grant program, and the awards range from $692 to $6895 in this current academic year. We've seen slight upticks in that program from year to year. Another program is called the Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant, also known as SEOG. Usually a student has to be eligible for Pell to get this. The maximum award amount is $4,000 per year. Students, if your student is fortunate enough to receive one of these grants, those award amounts typically are not going to be $4,000, because I had mentioned earlier that priority FAFSA filing deadline. The SEOG grant and the work study program are two of those programs where we have to decide at the school level who's going to get the funds. So we usually, again, have that priority filing deadline to be considered for those 8 programs. And then we're trying to award those funds to as many students as possible. So we typically are throwing out awards out there of anywhere. It could be, you know, at some schools it's as little as $400 or $500, and in other schools it might be like $1,000 to $2,000. But you're not usually going to see a $4,000 award in there. Now, if your student is not awarded SEOG or the work study program, but they qualify for it, they met the priority filing deadline, they just weren't awarded those funds, you should contact the college because they might have a waiting list. for those available, should those funds become available throughout the course of the year, could have the opportunity to be reconsidered for those. The next type of award program that comes from the FAFSA is going to be student loans, or student and/or parent loans. So there is the subsidized loan that does not accrue interest while the student is in school. That's a need-based loan. There's the unsubsidized loan that does not accrue interest, or excuse me, that does accrue interest while in school and during the student's grace period. All right. And then there's Parent Plus loans. These are credit-based loans in the parent's name, and we're going to talk more about those loans. Again, work study is often, it's an award where the student can get a part-time job, part-time work study job on or off campus, depending on how the school has it set up. And they're going to be paid a bi-weekly paycheck for the hours that they work. So when you are looking at your aid offers, I usually tell folks, don't think of the work study program as something that's going to go towards tuition, because they're going to be earning that $2,000 over the course of the whole academic year, and they're not going to be earning enough up front at the beginning of the semester to put a big dent in those tuition payment plans if that's something that you're utilizing. Think of it more as spending money, or the money that they earn in the fall can be used towards books and supplies in the spring semester, and they can kind of roll that forward from year to year. But that's the work, with the work study, they're not going to be earning enough to be paying towards the tuition right away. So a little bit about these loans. So everybody qualifies for loans. And the reason that these loans are considered financial aid programs is because these are government guaranteed loans with no cosigners and no credit checks. All right, when a 17, 18-year-old walks into a bank and says, I need $5,000 for school, the bank's going to do a credit check with no credit history. They would be denied that type of loan. So that's why these loans are considered financial aid programs, because they can access this by simply completing an entrance counseling session that makes them aware of their rights and responsibilities as a new student borrower, and then they sign something called a master promissory note. So if a student is accepting a loan at the school, the financial aid office is going to provide the student with directions on completing the entrance counseling and the master promissory note. So just make sure they do that step, or if the student is going to accept that loan. As far as how much a student can get, it's not huge amounts. So a dependent student, their freshman year, can access $5,500, and it goes up by $1,000 as they progress in academic level. So $6,500 for a sophomore, and then $7,500 for juniors and seniors. If the family demonstrates financial need, then they can access the subsidized loan portion of the loan that's not accruing interest while in school. The maximum amount is displayed here. So it starts at $3,500, then goes to $4,500, and then $5,500 with this $2,000 add-on. So the type of loan that you are going to be, or your students going to be offered, is really dependent on what that financial needs situation looks like at the particular school. The relatively low interest, they were a bit lower a couple years ago. The rates, they were down under 4, but we're now seeing it's a fixed 4.99 for the current academic year, and that is the interest rate over the life of the loan for the students borrowing in 22-23. There's a 6-month grace period before the student is expected to enter repayment on the loan. So they won't be asked to make payments until they have either graduated, or they left school, or their enrollment falls below 6 credits a semester. And that doesn't include scheduled breaks like summer. So we all know that not all students take classes in the summer. So that is not going to initiate the grace period. The other reason these are considered financial aid is because there is a variety of repayment plans available. Students have the option, if they pick no repayment plan, it's whatever they borrowed is split out over a 10-year standard plan. But if they borrowed significant amounts over the course of their undergraduate and possibly graduate career, they can extend out the repayment term. There are payment plans that are graduated, where they start paying less in the beginning and then it increases over time. They even have income-driven repayment plans that will tie the amount being paid per month to what the student is making in terms of income. So that's why these are flexible and they are considered aid programs. And there's more information about these student loans at studentaid.gov. The parent loan. So this is an option for parents of dependent students. Parents can take this to fill the gap between the costs and the financial aid awarded to the student. They can also take it to replace the expected family contribution. It is credit-based. It is not as deep of a credit history check, looking so much at debt-to-income ratio. It's looking more at, do you have derogatory remarks on your credit history file within the last 180 days? Okay, so as long as you're paying your bills on time and things aren't getting reported, then the parent would qualify for this. Now, if the student is going to utilize student loans and the parent is looking to take on funds, but they know they're not going to be approved, there's a couple of options. A parent can apply for this loan with an endorser, it's like a co-signer, or they can apply for the loan and based on who denied the loan, it will allow the student to access more in the unsubsidized loan. Okay. As far as how to apply for this loan, it's going to depend on the individual school. So there's really two ways. It's either a borrower-initiated application at studentaid.gov, or it's a school-based application. So how you would tell is you go to the financial aid webpage for the particular school, and it's going to tell you how they do their plus loans. Okay, because you want to make sure you're following their particular directions. So, I'm at a school where we start with a form. So a parent fills out a form with us and they send it to the financial aid office, and then we put things in our system and we send that record off to the Department of Education. I worked for another school where the parent had to go right to studentaid.gov and log in with their FSA ID and password, and they would enter information, indicate the school, and then the government would send the funds or send the information over to the school to do the next step in the process. So that's why I say just, if you are going to utilize this type of loan, make sure you're following the school's directions. Private education loans, these would be loans that could be taken, again, to cover the gap between financial aid being received and the total cost. The difference with these are going to be loans in the student's name. They are credit-based, so most 17, 18-year-olds don't have a strong credit history, so to get more favorable terms on the loan, they would need to apply with a co-signer. There are different repayment structures. There are fixed versus variable rate options. Students could be deferring the entire loan until after they leave school. They could be making interest payments. They could be paying interest plus principal. Now, when you hear the horror stories, and I tell this every time I do this presentation, when you hear the horror stories in the news about the students who, they borrowed $20,000, but yet now what their outstanding loan debt, it's like this exorbitant amount. It's these private education loans where students get themselves into trouble. And I'm going to tell you sort of an anecdotal thing that just happened to me recently. My oldest stepdaughter is a freshman this year at a public school in Rhode Island. And she has a roommate who, because of extenuating circumstances, had to go through the dependency override process. She essentially doesn't have parents. So she has to turn, her roommate had to turn to one of these private education loans. So they called me for advice and said, what do we do? And I had said, well, most schools, they have a lender list that will list who they partner with for these private education loans. And so they looked at it, and I get a screenshot of the computer with the question, is this good? And it was a $16,000 loan at a 14.53% interest rate with repayment terms of $429 for 144 months. So I did the math real quick. I said, this is $64,000 on a $16,000 loan over 12 years. I said, no, that's not good. Have her do another one. So when it comes to these kinds of private education loans, if a student is going to utilize this, it's a good idea to do some rate shopping. Students can apply through multiple lenders for these types of loans to really get the best rates. So don't just necessarily jump on the first one approved for, because there's a good chance they can see something better if they use a different type of lender. And again, the starting point is take a look at that school's financial aid webpage to see if they have a preferred lender list, because that's going to give you some ideas of where to start. When it comes to those financial aid awards coming from the institutions themselves, again, remember that whoever's giving out the money makes up the rules. So when it comes to these school scholarships, you want to know what the terms of those awards are, okay? As you get those scholarship notices, it's very exciting. You want to make sure that you understand what's the difference between a one-year recruitment scholarship that's not renewable versus those four-year renewable awards, or those two-year renewable awards. A lot of the renewable scholarships have some kind of GPA requirement attached to it, so you want to be aware of that. Should your student fall below, it jeopardizes their eligibility in future semesters and years. And you also want to make sure if some of the awards, if some of them are being given based on a particular program that they've been admitted into. So again, I'm a brand new student, I get a scholarship from University ABC because I got admitted to the nursing program. I'm super excited. I get $5,000 a year, renewable for 4 years to be $20,000 over the course of my undergraduate. But after my first year, I'm like, you know what? I don't think nursing is really for me. This whole blood thing, I can't do it. So I'm going to go on and I'm going to be a teacher instead. And I want to be a history teacher, so I'm going to change my program. Well, because my scholarship was based on the fact that I was a nursing student, because I changed over to do something different, I no longer qualify for that. So that's when we talk about those program scholarships. You want to make sure you understand all the terms of the scholarships being awarded so that there's no surprises. Again, I've talked about work study already. If the student is not given work study, but it is something that they are interested in, talk to the financial aid office to see if there's a waiting list available. Sometimes there's other employment opportunities open to students, we call like student employment. But again, it's open to all, and you don't have to have the work study program. But this is really great, and it's considered need-based employment, so it never counts against the student when determining aid eligibility in the future. So we're going to wrap up and finish with some Q&As, but just a couple more things. You want to make sure that you are comparing, when you're comparing aid offers, and you've got them all laid out on the dining room table, and you're saying, okay, this school has given us this, and this school has given us this. Understand what is making up those awards, how much of it is gift aid, how much of it is self-help aid. Is one school including a Parent Plus loan as part of the aid package where the other school is not, right? So just because the school puts zero as your out-of-pocket cost, if there's a $25,000 plus loan included in there, and you don't want to take a plus loan, well, then you have to mentally take that out to be able to compare the apples to apples, right? Compare that annual net cost, and don't be so concerned if you're looking at schools with vastly different costs and one gives a higher scholarship amount than the other. Again, it's what's that net cost look like? And any student that is going to be taking on a student loan, even a parent taking a parent loan, I highly recommend that you use the loan calculators at studentaid.gov. I'm a huge proponent of know before you owe. It is so easy to get wrapped up in the excitement about going off to school and getting accepted, and you're like, okay, we're going to do whatever it takes, and we're going to take on all these loans. What is it going to look like at graduation? What's it going to look like at the end of 4 years or at the end of 6 years if they're going on to a master's program? What is that monthly repayment amount going to look like? All right, so that's it. For some, it should be a consideration because it may not necessarily be worth it to live in the single dorm at the higher cost versus living in the triple where they still get the dorm experience, but it's not quite so much money, okay? Each year, the school is going to issue a 1098-T. Be on the lookout for that because you can use it to claim education credits on your tax return. So you should harass your student for that when it comes tax time, and then you give that to your accountant. They will help you to determine if you qualify, or you can read about it yourself in IRS Publication 970. One of the things I want to mention, satisfactory academic progress. So when it comes to federal and state aid programs, students do need to be making minimum progress standards to continue receiving those aid programs. So just like scholarships that might have a GPA requirement, federal and state aid programs have GPA and progress requirements as well. I mention this because usually this doesn't fall onto a student's radar until they have a problem with it. Because again, it's like nobody wants to talk about academic progress at orientation when they're like super excited and they're registering for classes. Nobody wants to say, oh, by the way, if you don't do well, you could jeopardize your aid eligibility. So I mention this now in all my presentations to help you to understand, yes, your student needs to pass a certain percentage of the classes that they're attempting. If any time your student thinks that things are not going well, they can talk to us in financial aid. We are not scary people, I promise, and we would rather have that conversation with the student halfway through the semester to say, okay, here are resources you can explore, because if you don't pass that math and English class, you're only passing 50% of the 12 credits you attempted, and you're gonna have a problem with your spring financial aid. Like, we would rather have that conversation than have them come in as soon as grades get posted and they get notified, and they're like, I don't know how I'm paying my spring bill because I lost my aid. And then we have to like rapidly try to go through an appeal process. Would rather avoid that. So anytime your student may not be doing so well and they're an aid recipient, they should come talk to us in financial aid. If they think they're going to change their enrollment, they want to drop a class or withdraw from a class, they should talk to the financial aid office. What are the current implications for the current semester, and then how could that potentially affect future financial aid? Schools are going to publish their policies on their websites on the financial aid pages because we are required to by law. So if you would like some, really entertaining reading, you can start looking at progress charts on those financial aid web pages. Again, link to these resources, various resources, this presentation, directions on the FSAID are going to be pushed out by the guidance department. So take a look at all of that. Feeling more like this than the guy in the very beginning was like, oh, right? With that, that is my contact information. You are welcome to email me your questions because you might think of something after we leave. I'm going to take questions now. I'm also going to hang out for a little bit. So if you feel like you have a sensitive question that you don't necessarily want to ask in front of the group, we can talk about that one-on-one. So with that, does anyone have any questions? Come on. I know it's Saturday morning, but there's no way. Yes.
I was broadly because we probably texting them